All right, today we're going to dive into a really powerful story called Deep Water. And this isn't just fiction, it's an intense, personal story from the author's own life about how a childhood terror completely took hold, and, more importantly, the incredible journey he took to finally overcome it.
I mean, wow. That quote from the author William Douglas just throws you right into the deep end, doesn't it? You can feel the panic. And that's the key here. This isn't just a story about learning to swim. No, it's about staring down a deep-seated terror that literally shaped his entire life.
So, where did a fear this intense even come from? Well, we're going to look at two very specific moments from his childhood that really planted the seeds for this profound and lasting fear of water.
Okay, so the whole thing really got kickstarted when he was just a little kid, maybe 3 or 4. A wave knocked him down at the beach. You know, a scary experience for a toddler, for sure, and that created an initial dislike of the water. But it was the second incident, years later, that took that simple aversion and twisted it into a full-blown, life-altering phobia. And let's be really clear here, this so-called misadventure was way more than just a prank. You got to imagine, for a 10-year-old who's not a strong swimmer, getting chucked into the 9-foot deep end, that's basically a brush with death. This was the moment that fear went from a bad memory to a constant haunting ghost in his mind. And this wasn't some fear that he could just, leave at the poolside. Oh no, it followed him. It cast this huge shadow over his life well into his adult years. Let's take a look at exactly how it did that. You see, his phobia wasn't just some minor inconvenience. It was a thief. It actively robbed him of so many simple joys in life. I mean, just think about all the fun stuff that happens on or near water. Canoeing, fishing trips. He was totally cut off from all of it. And that constant feeling of being left out, of missing out, well, that's what built up this powerful determination to finally do something about it. So that really brings us to a crucial question, doesn't it? I mean, after all those years of living with it, why now? Why was he so determined to get over his fear of water? What was the final straw? Well, the answer is both simple and honestly really profound. He was just done. He was tired of being handicapped by this fear. He looked at his life and saw how it was ruining things, and he just made a conscious choice. Nope, not anymore. I am not going to live like this. And that decision wasn't just an empty promise to himself. It led to real action. He didn't just sit around and hope the fear would magically disappear. No, he came up with a systematic plan to take it apart piece by piece. So this next part is all about that methodical conquest. Okay, so let's really dive into this, because the way his instructor handled it was just brilliant. He didn't just, tell him to get in the water and swim. First, and this is key, he built a foundation of safety with a rope and pulley system. Then, he broke down this huge, overwhelming task of swimming into tiny, manageable chunks. First, just breathing. Then, just kicking. And only when Douglas had mastered each individual piece did they start putting it all together.
So get this, after 7 long months, the instructor's finished. He's done his job. Douglas can now, technically, swim. But, and this is a huge but, Douglas himself was not finished. He knew the real work wasn't over. Sure, he'd mastered the physical part, the mechanics, but he still had to defeat that ghost, that lingering psychological terror. And this leads us right into the climax of the whole story, confronting that ghost of his fear head-on. He had the skills, he knew what to do, but now he had to prove to himself, and only to himself, that he could handle that terror all alone, with no safety net. And he didn't pick some easy little test. No way. He went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire. We're not talking about a calm, predictable swimming pool here. We're talking a vast, open lake. And he set himself the goal of swimming 2 miles across it to Stamp Act Island. I mean, this was it, the ultimate test of both his swimming and his mental strength. And of course, just as you'd expect, right out there in the middle of the lake with nothing but deep, dark water below him, that old sensation came back. The terror made one last-ditch effort to grab him. That familiar icy feeling of panic started creeping back in. But this time, this is the moment that changes everything. Instead of letting it win, he looks that fear right in the eye. He actually talks to it, he challenges it, and then he proves who's boss by just swimming on. It's in that moment that he finally, truly breaks free. So, okay, what's the big lesson here? What did he learn from this whole incredible ordeal? Because this story is so much more than just an adventure. It's a really deep reflection on the nature of fear itself. Now, this is what I find absolutely fascinating.
He makes this crucial distinction. When he thinks back to that near-drowning experience, he realizes the actual sensation of dying was kind of peaceful. The real horror, the true, paralyzing, suffocating terror, wasn't death. It was the fear of death. That's what had been holding him prisoner. And that right there helps us finally understand the real meaning of the title. Deep water isn't just about how many feet of water were in the pool or the lake. It's a perfect metaphor for the depth of his fear, the psychological trauma that was so deep-rooted it felt like it was part of his very soul.
So really, when you boil it all down, his journey is just this incredible lesson in perseverance. It proves that even the fears that feel the most permanent, the most deeply rooted, can be overcome. You just need determined, methodical, and persistent effort. It's all about those small victories, taking it piece by piece, that eventually lead to something truly huge.
And all of this really brings us to that famous quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt, which just perfectly sums up the entire story. All we have to fear is fear itself. For Douglas, these weren't just words in a history book. He lived them. He understood in his bones that his true enemy was never the water. It was the terror that his own mind had created.
And so that leaves us with one last thing to think about. Douglas's deep water was, literal water. But we all have our own versions of that, don't we? Our own deep-seated challenges, our anxieties. So the story kind of invites us to ask ourselves, what deep water have you learned to conquer?